Hey guys, this is Jerry from AdventuresInHomebrewing.Beer. I just got a couple quick packages in the mail. I figured it was time for a great unboxing, so let's see what we got. So we've got a nice box here. Yep. Okay, so this is the top. This has a slightly domed setup. This is the distilling top. But also because of that hole in the middle, that fits a number 10 stopper, and there's a nice gasket on the inside to help keep a nice seal along the way. So that's the distilling top. Let's see what else is in here. Oh, looks like we got another box. So I'm going to pause this for a second to get that other box out. So we've got the Brewer's Edge mash and boil, and that's why we've got the distilling top. So let's see how well this is packaged up. It's a nice heavy duty box, so should be in really good shape. So this is one of the later generation ones because it's got the clamps right there along the edge. From my understanding, the first generation did not have it. There's a little hole here for venting for when you are going through and working on your boil. Nice little hole there, a little warning that says don't touch the metal body. It's probably a pretty important thing when it's hot. You can see the valve down there. Now I got the version without the pump because I figured a chugger pump would help me with the recirculation for what I needed. So let's take this out of the box. So here we go. I like that these are nicely spring loaded. It is a nice easy one-hand operation to get those off, and vice versa to get it on. That's easy enough to do one-handed if you need to. Well, so inside we've got our mash basket. I'm going to have to take two hands to get that out because it's packed very nicely in here, so there's not any issues. So you'll notice along the edges there's some flat areas. I'm assuming without reading up on anything that those are going to be what holds the grain basket in place as you're draining out during the sparge. So let's pull this out. So included in this is the mash and boil directions, and from what I've gathered online, there's some conversions in here that you really want to pay attention to when using the mash and boil. And the reason being is because it's to be the most efficient as possible. You'll see the marks in there of the amount of water, so it goes up to 7 gallons. So there's a little reading in here to do, not a ton, but there's definitely some hints and tricks in there to pay attention to. It talks about cleaning because that's an important part, the error codes and how to do the reset button. Hopefully this newer generation doesn't have the same errors, and the fact that there's a 2-year warranty. So looking at the basket, there's a nice screen down there. You can see my foot down there as an example. There's 4 screws down in there, bolts, whatever you want to call them, that do come through, and they come through to the other side like such. So there's 4 of them in there, and basically what happens is I was going through and I was trying to get it out, and once I just kind of turned it a little bit and got it so those were passed, that's great. And then you just rotate it, and it sits right on there, allowing this to drain out So there's probably about 1.5 to 2 inches from the bottom of that to the top, so you've got a little bit of leeway there. You should never have any spillage, and I pushed this all the way over to the edge, and you can see that there's a little play here and there from side to side. So down in here you see our valve down there. It looks like it's got some nice threads on it, so if you really wanted to put a bazooka tube on it, you probably could. And then it goes down here to this. It's a ball valve. It actually labels it on and off for you, and looks like that can unscrew. You've got your on, which you can then choose between 1,000 watt and the 1,600 watt. We've got the control panel here. And if you order the version with the pump would be coming out here, and it would go up and around onto the top. So I can't wait to get this fired up and get rolling with this and see what we can do with this. The Brewer's Edge mash and boil. So here we are at about 53 minutes since I started. I started at 70 degrees, so it's at 163. This is going to be a good temperature for you to mash in at. As you put in your grains, you're going to lose some temperature, but you can set it at the 163 and hold it. So about 53 minutes. And that was with the top completely open. If you have the top closed, you're going to have a much better time with holding temperature and raising that temperature. So I'm at about 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I did give a bump to the target temperature up above the boiling level since I've been sitting at 209. Now remember that I'm doing this with the top completely off. You can see that definitely I've lost some water to evaporation now. We're getting close to about a half gallon gone since I started this boil process. So we do have a boil going. It's just not like a heavy rolling boil. And the thermometer that I was using, the infrared one, I can't use now because of the steam, because that's going to give a false reading. It's going to be very difficult to get that. So I'm going to have to grab another instant read thermometer so we can stick that in there and see where it's at. So I grabbed a quick instant read thermometer here. I'm going to check the water temp here at the top. So even at the top of the pot, just short of 209, which is what it's currently reading down there. That number that's down there on the readout is pretty accurate based off of checking it with an instant read, just one of the cheapies off of Amazon. So it's not quite a rolling boil, but again, this is a completely open vessel that I'm doing this with right now. So I'm draining the mash and boil for the first time here. I've had my mash going for a little bit more than an hour. You can see that right now it's registering 153 down there. I did a check, it was 147 at the top of the mash bed. This seems to be doing a real nice job of draining out and making a nice compact grain bed. I'm going to sparge in some water here in a second. While I'm doing that, I figure I might as well show how to set the temperature. So I want to get this set up so I am ready for the boil. So while this is sparging out, I caught a tip to set it at 218 because that was just, it's good, it'll bring it up to the boiling point, and also to have the top on for part of the boil. So, so it's at 152 right now. We're still draining through pretty well. You can see our grain bed, and so we can get a good idea of some wort here. I'm going to take some out. Now this is completely unfiltered wort at the bottom because of the fact that there is the screen at the base of this, but I also want to get an idea of, looks pretty clear. A little bit of particulate in there, but not too bad. So see, it left a little bit behind. I kept the same crush as what I have for my brew in a bag. So we'll see what happens here. And I'm going to sparge through some water here, so I will need both hands because that's some hot water and I really don't feel like wearing it. So I added just short of 2 gallons of sparge water here. That should put me up to about 6 gallons total for my boil. And you can see that it's draining out pretty well. I did completely cover the green bed with the 2 gallons or so that went in, but it is draining through pretty fast, and so I should be getting some really nice wort along the way. So I just got to a good boil, and I had my top on, and as you can see with all the foam along the side, I just experienced my first boil over. It wasn't too bad, only a couple streaks down the side, but I had put the top on to help it reach its boiling point a little quicker. But it looks like it's got a nice boil going. I like this boil much better than what I was watching yesterday when I was just trying to get the water up to a boil. So this seems like it's doing better. Part of it is the fact that I had put the top on, and now we're just letting it run and seeing what happens. At this level of boil, you can see that looking in this area right here, you can see some of the grain did get through the screen, so you know that will end up settling out in the trub when I go through and ferment. But that's good to know that some people have done a different screen modification, adding in a better micron screen in there on top of the current one. That may make a difference, or even doing a brew in a bag. So that's something to consider when you are doing your mashing in and then getting into the boil. Another thing to consider is I have my grain mill on the smallest crush that it will do. I will have to kind of run a couple batches at different crushes to see how things turn out as well. Okay, so I popped the hop spider in during my brewing time. With 20 minutes left to go is when I put in my quote-unquote bittering hops, because I know that this is going to be a no-chill, so there's going to be a lot more contact time as far as with temperature and hops and so forth. So I just turned this off. Before I turned it off, it was set at 218. The bottom was registering 212. Up here at the top, with an instant read, it registered 210, so I'm okay with that temperature. It had a nice boil going on. You can see that there's a little bit of action going on right now with the protein and so forth, and so I'm going to let this chill on its own. I'm not going to use any immersion chiller or plate chiller or anything, but I'm going to let it chill down. Then I will pick some Kvike yeast. I haven't decided which variation I'm going to put in there, and I'll set the temperature on the unit to about 90 degrees for the fermentation, and I'll monitor that with a thermowell stopper that will have the airlock attached to it as well, just so I can make sure that I'm right on where I'm supposed to be. But yeah, so far so good. So good morning everybody. So I just drained out, finishing draining out my hop spider. You see all the, there's 2.5 ounces of pellet hops in there. And I've got my wort. I did a no-chill with my brew and mash here, Just kind of getting the last of it out. So ultimately we are right at 5 gallons of wort. I did a no-chill overnight, so now we are going to get ready to pitch some Kvike yeast in there, and we'll get this rolling. So I set up my airlock with a number 10 stopper up there. Currently it's reading at 92. I set it for 90. 92 is okay to pitch this blend of Kvike yeast in there. So we're going to keep that at 90 degrees for a couple days while this goes through and ferments. And we're going to let the Kvike do its work. I've got the Berserker blend in there from Maniacal Yeast. And so let's see how this thing does. So we are just past about 20 hours for fermentation. You can see I've got a good amount of bubbling going on in the airlock, and we're holding pretty well. So that's a good thing. I like to see that. So I'll give it a couple hours and then I'll open her up and do a little top cropping of the Berserker Kvike yeast, so that way I can propagate that and have that for future batches. Hey everybody, we're at about 22 hours. I just went through and pulled a bunch of the krausen off the top for a top crop, so I could propagate some of the Berserker Kvike yeast. So I've got it here on my dehydrator. We're going to run that for a little while, and we're going to close this back up and let it keep bubbling. Hey, so we are on about 46 hours. The temperature is still holding at 90, and it is still bubbling away a little bit here. I just took a peek on the inside just to see what was going on with the krausen. Some of the cryo hops had gotten to the top of the krausen, so it has been pushing around a little bit. There is no recirculation going on. There hasn't been any recirculation on this batch other than me using the pan to put some on top of the mash. But like I said, we're at about 46 hours of fermentation. Really liking the fact that it's holding right at 90 and that it hasn't turned off. And so this is just fermenting away, and hopefully we'll have a new batch to sample soon. Hey everybody, it's Jerry from AdventuresInHomebrewing.Beer. I am going to try my transfer today. So I used the mash and brew, and it's been 5 days since I brewed. I fermented in here. I used the distilling lid, and I used some Berserker yeast from Maniacal Yeast that loved the fact that I was able to set the temperature control on the mash and boil at 90 degrees. It fermented away. It started at a gravity of 1.057, and it shot all the way down to 1.011 in those 5 days. And really that's kind of a misnomer as well, because of the fact that I went through and did a no-chill. So I brewed 5 days ago. I didn't pitch the yeast until the following day, so it's really only been 4.5 days of fermentation for this to drop down like that, which is awesome. I did some top cropping along the way. That I took some of that yeast and threw it into the dehydrator, so that way I can try and rebuild that Berserker and share it with some friends, which is a great thing. So let's see how this does. Now when I go through, I'm going to be transferring it to that keg right there. I'm going to be using the ball valve down here, and because I'm not sure of how much stuff is in there, I'm going to be setting up my Bouncer MD, the Mac Daddy, with a screen that's going to be a little bit thinner than what you would normally use than what comes with it. It is the blue screen, and so we're going to do some straining because I really don't know how much of my mash stayed in there that may have snuck through the false bottom. when I was doing the mashing part for the mash and boil. So let's get it set up and let's see what happens. So you can see that this hops, there's some hops matter up here on the top. I have not filtered this at all, and so we're going to go through and send this through the bouncer. Now the bouncer is set up so it's coming out of the ball valve, and this is going entirely gravity. Usually I have this set up with a siphon, but I figured with the gravity that it should be okay. We are using the blue screen, so let's get rolling. So here we go, opening up the ball valve. Opening it up slow because I don't want to just blast through it. It'll purge some air as it goes through. And you can see that we do have the flow going through. Like I said, this is going entirely gravity fed to go into the keg. You see a nice flow going on down there, so this is getting a decent flow as it's going through the bouncer on the gravity fed. And the other thing is, you can see that with that ball valve wide open like that, it is draining real quick. So it was right at 5 gallons that had fermented, so I know the keg's not going to be all the way full, as some's going to be left behind. But what you see there is pretty much cryo hops, because I had used a hop spider to help keep some of the hops out of there. And let's see if we can maybe if I burped that a little bit to get that CO2 bubble out of there, but we do have some good transfer going on, and you see that it's still flowing pretty well down there. And it's still dropping down pretty well there. So after a few gallons, my bouncer did stall because the flow going in stalled. So I'm assuming that there's just some trub sediment that is blocking the path, and so we're gonna toss in the brew siphon and give that the rest of the way. So I've shut off the ball valve, and I'm gonna transfer over the end of my connection to the brew siphon, and we'll give it a shot. Okay, so my transfer is pretty much complete. This is a 5-gallon corny keg, so you see that I'm getting towards the top. I'm not quite at 5 gallons. I do have some shrub down there. There's not a lot. It's right at the top level of that ball valve, so I could probably just open that up and drain that into the fermenter. Next time I'm going to shoot to have a higher starting volume. That was right at 5 gallons. With this time I was just running a batch through just to see what happens. So Let's get this cleaned up and the keg closed up and throw some carbonation on there so we can enjoy this beer in just a few days. So even after I emptied it and then I continued, I got about another 1.5 gallons through. That's what was coming through still. So the bouncer still does a great job of pulling out the trub. So, and like I said, this was the second time of emptying this basket. So here you see what's left from my 10 pounds of grain, 2.5 ounces of hops that was in a hop spider that was taken out after the no chill. I then put in 1 ounce of cryo hops. So you see there's a decent amount down there. Doesn't appear to be any scorching or anything from running this at temp. So it does create a decent amount of trub. It also could be from the yeast that I used, but it's good to see just how much is in there. So I'm really impressed with how easily this cleaned up with all that trub that I just showed. I used 2 paper towels just to do some quick wiping out for some other stuff that might have been left behind as I was spraying it down, but this was a really easy clean, which is definitely a plus for this unit.